welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Colin Duff, CEO of Mosaic Innovation, a growth consultancy that helps leading enterprises. Welcome to the show, Colin.
Thank you, AJ. Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India. And I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from the topic that we'll be talking. You are an innovation and cultural transformation consultant. So my first question to you, Colin, is to understand this landscape better. So earlier they used to say that necessity is the mother of invention. And nowadays, a lot of invention is happening. Whether is that out of necessity or is that driven by profit? How do you see that? Because you have seen this sector very, very closely. You advise a lot of firms. You have led 100+ major invention projects and trained many, many people.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone now sees the impetus to innovate. We're beyond the stage where anyone can deny the need to do so. And usually it's driven, I'm sad to say, by a purely commercial lens of how can we make more money, when actually what all the literature shows in my experience is the best way to think about innovation is what are the unresolved customer problems, what are the pain points on our experience. So it's driven by, I guess, a materialistic lens when what shows through there's a methodology design thinking. When it's driven by a more humanistic lens, you tend to be more successful.
Okay. So now coming to, the whole environment for innovation. So how does a company create an environment for innovation so that there is real and actual innovation that happens? How do you advise companies on this part?
So I'll tell you what many companies do when they start innovating is they throw a bunch of people in a room and tell them to brainstorm and to come up with some grand vision. And it tends not to be a very good strategy because it's far better to start with thinking about what are those unresolved customer problems. So the first bit of advice I give is you need to build what I'd call an inspiration engine. So a lot of particularly big companies, they rely on the market reports and market research. The problem with doing that for innovation is it tends to tell you things you already know, things like, your user preferences or that this part here is growing by 5%, etc. And great innovation insight are more like stories than statistics. So they're not shown up in those reports. So I always advise people you need to get out of the building and observe things. So we were working for a few years ago, a big generator manufacturer. So the generators that produce power in outside environments. And they were obsessed that the innovation must be an app because everyone was doing an app at the time. And we went out and observed some customers. And one of the first things I noticed was they were trying to push this generator through some grass and it had been really rainy and the generator was getting stuck in the grass. And the big insight, and this was an industry-wide one that really transformed it, was bigger wheels. So a decades-old industry, they just relied on focus groups and asking people, and it wasn't always front of mind. So that's my number one piece of advice is great insight leads to great ideas. Purely relying, as most people do, in ever more elaborate brainstorming and lateral thinking techniques is quite a poor way to go. The other thing I'd say that's really important is most innovation sadly fails, about 70 to 80%. And doesn't matter how good you are, the same rates are at Google, Netflix, Amazon, etc. And a lot of people have got it into their head that if we just think about it and analyze it ever more sophisticatedly and smartly, we can improve those odds. And again, what the literature in my experience shows is that's really not the case. The only way to tell if a good idea will work in the messy real world, because so often customers will say, I love this product, I want it, and then they don't buy it, is to actually get out there and test it. And the best way to test is test lots of little ideas quickly and cheaply. And then the ones that show traction, invest more money. But the way most companies are still innovate these days is they bet the house on one big idea that they're passionate about. or at least maybe the highest paid person in the organization is passionate about, and it kind of gives it this Julius Caesar thumbs up, thumbs down, based on really just thinking, spreadsheets, PowerPoint. Great if you're doing something in your core business that's very incremental. Not good if you're doing something that's novel, new to world, and untested.
Right, right. You have a lot of experience in this sector, Colin. So, how does uh, invention start? Whose responsibility is it about inventions? Earlier, it used to be, simple people. There is some issue, and they're there trying to solve. Now, big companies. Is it about big companies? You have worked with HP, Marriott, Honda. Uh,
Yes.
and is what about smaller companies? What about individuals? So to understand exactly how does innovation start? Does it start from a garage? Does it start from a big firm working in very comfortable environment, or does it work from some innovation hub? How does it work? How does this idea thing develop into something big for not just in terms of systems and management and companies, but also at a wider audience as a whole?
I think different types of innovation start in different places. So the thing that the big companies do really well is incremental innovation. So if they're just adding like Gillette, an extra razor blade or exfoliating strip or heated razor, that's really tough to beat them on a like for like basis. They've got the resources. Where the big companies struggle is, what are the things that are going to disrupt the industry and change the dynamics in terms of the economics, the routes to market? So you see someone like in that same industry, the Dollar Shave Club, and they actually were selling the first to sell direct razors to customers for a really low price. And it took the likes of Gillette and the other leaders a really long time to respond because it threatened their core business. So innovation can happen anywhere, but the type of innovation, typically the smaller, more entrepreneurial organizations are better at the business model stuff. The bigger ones tend to be better at the more what's called sustaining or incremental innovation. And it's always this debate over, is innovation R&D or tech-led, or should it be customer-led? And there's examples of both. But again, all of the literature in my experience shows if you've got a solid customer or user problem, it's far better to discover that and come up with a solution than the inverse. So I'll give you a great example. I worked with one of the world's biggest consumer goods companies, and they had invented a liquefied form of tea. So instead of getting the loose tea or the tea bags, they'd made this liquid, and our job was to try and create the concept. The problem was no one actually wanted this. It was quite expensive. It didn't taste good. And I've seen so many companies say, worked with a big shipping company once, and they invested in a 3D printing technology company. And I said, oh, that's super cool. What are you guys going to do? And they said, oh, that's why we've hired you. And I thought, well, could you not have hired us first to say, should we do it? And you've got this kind of a tail wagging the dog of what's our metaverse strategy? And sometimes you need to think, well, what is the customer problems we're trying to solve rather than jumping on the technology, which is still very common.
Okay, right. Now, let's talk about the role of this brainstorming. Sometimes people can go over the board, they brainstorm so much that the idea is lost. And it can happen with bigger firms or maybe in a different, for an individual who is working on an idea, and then they want some sort of a funding, people who can support them to build on that idea. What is the role of brainstorming here? How can one use brainstorming positively and also know what is the limit to brainstorming and actually getting down to work and not just getting caught up in unnecessary ideas and unnecessary analysis about an idea itself before trying it?
So really good question. And I'd characterize some organizations and people as ideaholics. It's almost as if every other week, let's have another brainstorm, which more often than not leads nowhere. So I'd say firstly, track how effective the brainstorming is, what percentage of it leads to actual real world action. But the biggest piece of advice going into a brainstorm, I can say, and the biggest myth of innovation is blue sky, go anywhere, no limits, just stick stuff on the wall. Far better to have a focus and say, look, we've identified this specific product area, this customer problem, maybe there's a technological angle on it. That's where we want to focus. Now, the mind is not so neat. You'll get some ideas that are more wildcard. And then the other big tip I have for you is think about what are the next steps. And this is where most people do it really badly. They put a bunch of ideas on the wall in post-it format, summarize some bullets, send them round, and then tumbleweed, right? Nothing happens. So I'd say think about, and there's some great resources on our website, mosaicinnovation.com, or other websites if you Google concept templates and blueprinting. And the next stage of any ideation brainstorming session is let's flesh this out from really a starter thought, this is interesting, into something that is actionable. So we're thinking through not just desirability, do customers want it, but how would we actually make this? What are the technical, operational, and commercial lenses? And then how do you test this with users quickly? I can't emphasize this enough because however much you love it, you want to get it in front of at least half a dozen people. And I'd usually be suggesting that should be happening within a couple of weeks to maintain the momentum. And having those users lined up, that should be your first decision point. If you get positive feedback, it's a good indication you should continue. If it's negative, you should probably drop it or certainly be rethinking it. But the amount of times I see people who do a brainstorm and I say, oh, well, how are you going to decide how to proceed? Oh, we had a vote. And you think, really, that's how you're making your innovation strategy. Very insular. And again, usually swayed by politics. And, you know, my boss loved this idea. Let's do that idea. The other one is then moving into really quick, rapid prototyping. And it's never been easier. A couple of weeks ago, we made a video and it looked really slick. A kind of 2-minute advert for a new product that a big client was considering. And it was like Steven Spielberg. And we made it for a few £1,000s because the technology out there and the contractor network, even if you don't have internal resource, things like Upwork.com or Fiverr.com in the UK, you can get really world-class people to build clickable prototypes, make videos, to create storyboards or other assets that can give you the impression of the idea being real. And by making things real, you can really get into those nuances behind the idea and get people as well inside your organization excited. Post-it notes, PowerPoint slides are cheap. Things, interfaces, videos, they excite people and really build momentum behind ideas.
Right, Colin. Now, a very important role is that of leaders. And they are the ones who have to go ahead to many things. And obviously, if they have a good thinking mind, innovation can certainly thrive. So, what is the role of leaders actually on the ground in terms of innovation? And certainly, and secondly, you talk about some of the things that leaders get do not get fully correct, or they're understanding it a bit different in terms of innovation. Help us understand what leaders can give best in terms of innovation wherever they are in terms of promoting a good idea.
So the first thing I'd say, surprising, is every leader will talk about how important innovation is. And if you ask them simply, what percentage of your time do you personally spend on innovation? It's often very surprising just how little it is. Oh, I've left it to the team because I'm very empowering. But you think, but you haven't left other critical aspects of your business, your team. You're actively involved. And even actually to the extent of them being in the room during things like brainstorms, which a lot of them will say, oh, I'm too important. If they're not there, they don't tend to have the same buy-in. And the key role, particularly in a large organization, of a leader is actually one of diplomacy. So we're naturally predisposed when we hear new thoughts, and particularly if it's not been our idea and we're in another part of our organization and someone pitches it, to think, oh, actually, I'm not sure about this and we've got a lot going on and it's going to take away my resources. And that's where you really need your leaders to use what I guess I'd call the executive sword to kind of cut through some of those early stage bureaucracy. So again, I remember we're a large industrial company. We had a brilliant idea for this breakthrough product. And we said, look, we need £10,000 or €10,000 for a feasibility study. And we're told, well, the committee that's assessing it doesn't meet for 7 weeks. And we thought, wait a minute, we've got to sit around for 7 weeks for some people to meet. We need somebody to challenge that nonsense and say, no, we want a decision today, tomorrow. And it's only with leaders that can do that. They can kind of bang heads together. And they can also as well ensure that they sponsor it so that the idea doesn't end up an orphan. So a lot of companies, they send their innovators off in a kind of darkened corner, or maybe it's some really cool office with an innovation hub. They come up with these radical ideas, spend months or even years on them, then they try and take them back to the mothership, and then they find out, oh, it's off strategy, or no one really is supportive. So the executive uniquely, or the leader, needs to own being the advocate for that idea and saying, okay, I'm taking responsibility to make it happen. Because if it's not aligned to the organization's strategy, why are they doing it? It's probably the wrong idea. And that is remarkably common. Companies just innovating in areas they have no capability, or frankly, sometimes no interest. A few years ago, I remember drones, the amount of companies who were doing drone technology. I still don't entirely understand why, just because it was cool, and they're flying. 3D printing was another kind of fad technology. I'm sure we're going to see lots in the metaverse as well, of companies just throwing money at something that's new and shiny.
Right, Colin. So, can you help us understand which areas are actually some great innovations actually happening? And a lot of times people get confused by digital transformation and people, or even incremental innovation, and people think, okay, something new is happening. So how would you help the audience understand, firstly, which sectors actually some great innovation is happening, and the difference between innovation and digital transformation? Is it the same thing, or are they two different things, and how one should distinguish between them?
No, definitely not. And there's widespread confusion. I was with a big company a few weeks ago, and they said, huge company, we have 300 innovation initiatives. And I thought, oh, fantastic. And we looked through the list, and it was things like, in our app, we're going to enable biometric security. And I thought, but there's nothing innovative about that. You're taking an existing thing, identity and verification, and you're digitizing and modernizing it. So that typically, if you're doing something and making it digital, or using a new technology to do it more efficiently, is where digital transformation sits. Innovation needs to have an element of novelty, and that's novelty at a sector level. So, what's innovative in one sector can be different from another. So a really useful distinction. And each organization will have its own specific definition it's worth going through. And then, AJ, you hit the other nail on the head with, how innovative does it need to be innovative? And I would recommend organizations think about it in terms of 3 buckets or swim lanes. You've got efficiency innovation. So maybe something like Aldi, the supermarket, it puts barcodes in every side of its product, and therefore it's got the fastest checkout speed of any supermarket. Really small, simple idea that's been a big impact. Then you've got the kind of sustaining innovation. And we talked earlier about Gillette. So that's where they're just doing continuous things like adding another razor. It's now up to 5 and 1 in the back, or the exfoliating strip. And then you've got the disruptive innovation, the kind of sexy stuff that we think of with innovation. This is your Airbnb, your Uber, those kind of more breakthrough stuff. And they all absolutely have their place. And it's worth, as an organization, thinking, where do we want to focus resources and effort? And that will vary. So if you're Google and you're leading edge, really wanting to push the envelope, you'll skew more towards those breakthrough technologies, the driverless cars, right? The Project Loon, where they're using hot air balloons to deliver Wi-Fi in Africa. If you're in maybe more consumer goods, you're making laundry detergent, skincare, you're probably going to be more towards the mid area, where you're doing, new features, new fragrances, new pack architecture, etc. So all of it has a place, but you as an organization will need to decide how much emphasis you're giving to one and the other, and also how you structure it. So if you're doing more incremental stuff, the people who are closest to the action and understand it are best placed. If you're doing more breakthrough, you typically need people with a bit more innovation, sophisticated experience, maybe a bit more center of excellence, skunk work. So setting up a separate team or separate unit, looking more at things like joint ventures with startups as well. So you really need to have a strategy for this rather than, as I say, go innovate is like, go be more strategic. It doesn't really mean anything.
Right, right, Colin. And herein comes then organizations like yours, Mosaic Innovation. So help us understand what role your Mosaic Innovation is playing in this field. What is it that you people do, and
Yeah.
who are the people who can connect with you so that you are able to handhold them, help them, and also achieve the mission of actually bringing a thriving environment for innovation.
So, I mean, we do two things fundamentally. One is invention, where people come in a classic consulting model and say, we've got a problem, can you come up with innovative solutions? But the other thing that's more common is more on capability. We don't want you to have this kind of advertising agency model where we give you a problem and you solve it. We want you to actually upskill and enable our people to solve it. And that's probably, the world is moving positively more to the latter. And most organizations struggle with two things. So they don't struggle with brainstorms and ideas generally. It's getting that breakthrough insight, which is really difficult. If you're in a mature commodified category, so you're in the printing industry, you're in telecommunications, as I mentioned earlier, traditional market research really won't help. And that's where we've really got a toolkit of thinking about things like, is there a neglected segment? So let me give you an example from laundry detergent, about as boring as it gets. I shouldn't say that for the people working. Every single laundry detergent in the US and UK and most of the world is targeted at women and families because they're the head of the household and they purchase. So it's all pink or lilac. It's all feminine fragrances. In the UK, 18% of households are now male only. So, and similar figure in the US. So there's a couple of companies thought, what would a male detergent look like? It's probably black, it's really masculine, it smells of oak and musk, and they've been really successful. So that's just one specific technique, as we'd say, if you're going to innovate, think differently about how you segment and see the world. The other area they're coming to us a lot for is, we've actually got an idea and we quite like it. How do we experiment quickly, cheaply, entrepreneurially? So for them, historically, and I'm talking about big organizations, they might say, well, in a year, we're doing it for $500,000. Aren't we great? And we're saying to them, well, actually, could you do it in 6 weeks for a few £1,000s? And people will say, how is that possible? But you're actually trying to shrink it down and think about what are some of the critical assumptions here. So we did one with a big tech company, and they were trying to sell a new subscription service to older people. So it had to be in store. So we just designed some really simple posters, some leaflets, and we put on some branded t-shirts, got out in some stores, and actually just tried to sell the thing. Now, it's not as robust as had you put a website and lots of traffic and thousands of people, but we were able to test multiple ideas and do something you can't always do digitally, which is speak to people and find out why, to see the look on their face. And within a 2-week period, we tested 6 ideas, and then we got a website live and we drove some traffic to it. And you can just find out for a few £1,000s things that historically would take months or years. So probably the greatest determinant for me to innovation success is speed. So every startup knows they get some funding and they've got what's called runway. So you've got 2 months, 6 months till your money runs out. And I think that's the mindset and attitude anybody wanting to innovate needs to have, is I want to set the shortest period possible to figure out, can I progress to the next stage? And only then should I invest more money or be given more money. What happens generally is teams get a big bundle of money, and then often they kind of squander that without really showing any traction.
Right. So how do people, organizations connect with you so that they can know more about you as well as professionally engage with your company?
Yeah, so our website's mosaic-innovation.com, and we've got quite a lot of brochures and probably more usefully toolkits that have practitioner templates, tools, guides to do some of this stuff like innovation insight, experimentation. So I'd say if you're interested, check those out and then just reach out to us. And what we love doing with prospective clients and charities as well is just having what we would call a kick around, a chemistry session, and thinking what are all the interesting things we could do. And really that's the best way to work out if we are the right people to work with. Such a broad space, everyone does it differently. I'd say what we bring to it though is there's a lot of, because there's no qualification innovation, there's a lot of people who have drifted into it and a lot of kind of snake oil salesmen and charlatans and just nonsense. So I think our team, we've got some PhDs in innovation and we've all read quite a lot of books and things. So we're knowledgeable, but we're also street smart. I know a lot of the big consultancies now do innovation and they're very good at the intellect, but on some of the practical, stuff that you just can't imagine. Like I mentioned a retail experiment earlier. One of the challenges was genuinely getting access to the Wi-Fi in the store because it was managed externally. So it's like going out and buying a dongle on the day, or I don't know, the branded polo shirts didn't come on way to run and get them printed. So you kind of need, innovation is a messy activity, right? You can't sit in an office and just be very bookish about it.
Right, Colin. My last question to you is that you have seen a lot of innovation. You have worked with a lot of companies from Viagra to P&G to Irish Postal Service to HP, Marriott, Honda, all the best. And you are very young. You are the CEO of this company. I'm sure money is just not the only driving factor. So I just wanted to understand for the audience is what exactly drives you, and what is it that you want to achieve now for yourself in the real sense?
I joined, bizarrely given my field now, a very traditional large energy company. And I was always the one that wanted to do those brainstorms I critiqued, these crazy ideas. And people were saying, no, get on with your kind of real work. And I think it's just a curiosity about human insight. I mean, you mentioned the Viagra project. Going over to Russia, that's where we had it, and talking to people about their sex lives, it just, for me, was absolutely fascinating and how you could improve it. And then the next time actually going and learning about the tea market, or the next time vaporized vodka or shipping. So I just love that the methods are applicable to any context and industry, but the subject matter is just really generally fascinating. Some are more interesting than others. And also actually getting our clients noticed and promoted, especially we work with some clients in what might be considered dull industries, like I mentioned, things like printing, telecommunication, and they don't get the glory always of those kind of iPhone makers, but I like to think we bring them some of that glamour and some of that kudos in those industries as well. So yeah, I just got a real buzz out of it. It's such an interesting and varied career. I don't think I would be capable now of doing anything else.
Right. On this note, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
It's a pleasure, AJ. Thank you.